Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with Pastor Brian with Kyell Gold. And remember, if you like this video, hit like and subscribe and hit the little bell notification so you know when I put up more videos. And today we're going to talk a little bit about masculinity, especially toxic masculinity, and how we are seeing that or not seeing it in Lucifer and a few other TV shows. So I usually throw things over to Brian. First of all, I'll do that again. Opening thoughts, Brian?
I think just in our reflection of, I guess I'll cop to having Netflix and you know, constantly searching Netflix for new things to watch. I do think as someone, a Gen Xer raised in the 80s on Xer movies, I do think that there is a progression going on, and I think we're seeing this attempt to detoxify masculinity and also just gender nonconformity that's getting more stronger and better, in my opinion. And so I think that is a cool thing to just even look at Netflix, which is reasonably ubiquitous, and see the changing role of gender and masculinity, especially in this still patriarchal society that we live in.
Opening thoughts, Kyell? Anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I think I obviously completely agree. I was also raised on the media of the 70s and 80s, when you would start to see cracks in what had been the steadfast masculinity of like the 50s and early 60s. And a lot of the 80s were, I think, people trying to reclaim that steadfastness and not allow the cracks to spread. But we've seen over the past few decades, certainly it seems to have accelerated a lot more just in the last 5 or 6 years, an acceptance that masculinity can mean a whole spectrum of different things to different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you mentioned the 80s, both of you, and I was trying to think of the TV shows I watched back then. And usually, yeah, we have some white heroes, 2, 3, and then there may be a female character. She sometimes got replaced in between seasons, and the male characters not so much. But she was like, let's put women in here, right? But they don't necessarily do a whole lot. And I think we were a little past that we had to rescue them every week. But they were still like definitely secondary characters who showed up for maybe a few scenes and weren't really involved in a lot of the main plots. And that's changed, right? So in Lucifer, our main character, besides the devil, is his sidekick at the police department. So we have a woman as one of the main 2 characters who has her own agency and, you know, doesn't depend on him to rescue her or anything. So so hopefully we're seeing more of women having agency, but that also means we are seeing hopefully more of men who don't have to be hoodwinked or I don't know, gotten around, that we want to be cleverer than them or better than them or whatever, because the male character is always going to be clever or better. So maybe now we're having a little bit where that happens less. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think I'm wearing actually my Star Wars rainbow lightsaber shirt today. That this was not planned, but I was actually just, as you were saying that, and we're talking about generational shift or, you know, over time progress. One of the things that always annoys me about Star Wars is how like heteronormative it is, right? Like you just don't have queer characters, at least explicitly so. And of course now everyone's talking about Poe Dameron, and I don't know, there's like a little gay bromance kind of maybe going on, but and of course Rey was very controversial, right, as a strong woman, although everybody's in love with Ahsoka Tano, which is again kind of like, do you have to be the most powerful and the most witty, and like, is there an unbelievable bar for a woman to be where like the mediocre men just automatically get acknowledged power? So I think we're moving there. I think we're not even close. I think even in Lucifer, when I think of like our disappointment with Mazakine's this story arc this year, where it's kind of like all of a sudden, you know, she loses her agency for some reason, you know, so a little bit. And so that is interesting to me. I think even of the 80s, one of my favorites, Give Me a Break, Nell Carter, like totally anchoring that, right? But again, why did she get to have the power? Because you do not mess. I almost demonetized you. by saying the F-bomb. You do not mess with Nell Carter. You know what I mean? And so she has to take on the role of the stereotypical male in order to have some agency and some independence and some authority.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of toxic masculinity in real life in the past few years. And I was kind of wondering if some of the stuff on TV is as a reaction to that, or just a normal part of our society is now, it's okay for women to actually make their own choices and have their own careers. And then it's perfectly okay to like, yep, she has a career. Cool, moving on. Or, is that just still idealized to the point where, we get some people in Washington are all like, yes, I'm a great bully and I love putting women down. So aren't I fantastic? We're kind of, maybe our society is a bit schizophrenic over that we have these competing, I guess cognitive dissonance would be a better term. But, so we have some toxic masculinity going and these like non-toxic masculinities at the same time being developed. Thoughts, Kyell?
I was thinking, as Brian mentioned, Star Wars. So I think to answer your question, there is kind of there's definitely different takes depending on where you're looking and who's there. Like you could probably poll 10 members of Congress and get 10 different takes on what masculinity means. But I was thinking about Star Wars and specifically the last two movies, where when you had The Last Jedi, you have the storyline where Poe Dameron is trying to be the masculine hero and jump in and save everything, only to have the women explain to him why he's actually screwing everything up. And he accepts that. Like that's a moment in the movie where the attempt to kind of hold to those old standards of, the guy has to run in and save everything, is actually specifically and literally knocked down. And then in the last movie, you had them clearly wrestling with the whole, well, we want Rey to be the hero and the strong character, but at the same time, like, we have to redeem this poor Adam Driver character who is like so troubled, and like, I hope I'm not spoiling it too much, but he takes away some of Rey's agency at the end of the movie. And so that feels more like kind of a decade ago trying to make this like play at giving female characters more agency, while actually like, oh, they get agency when the men give it to them, kind of thing.
And of course, she has to sacrifice hers to be the caretaker, right? And it's also notable that the second to last was directed by a woman, and the last one was directed by a man. If I'm correct, I do.
I think the second to last was.
Wasn't it?
I'm blanking on the director's name, but I think it was a man. But he definitely had done more thoughtful.
I remember some discussion
movies.
about
He's the guy who
some
did,
woman having influence. Yeah. My apologies.
Ryan Johnson.
Yeah.
Oh, was it? Okay.
But he's a very good and I think more thoughtful director in general than Abrams. Is Abrams the one who did the 7th and 9th parts?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, how much lens flare was there? There was like,
yeah.
No, it was Abrams.
I mean, there's a huge discussion. I have, during pandemic and trying to avoid the toxic masculinity in the media, I've absorbed myself much more deeply in Star Wars lore, and of course, that's the big discussion, right? All of this, and of course, how much is like incel men just rejecting Rey, but how much is also this? I think this extra attempt to make her, what do they call her, Mary Sue, like where she has to be all powerful in order to inherit what Luke could do just by being mediocre, or reasonably so, right?
Yeah. So,
right.
So are we still seeing a lot of examples of toxic masculinity? I don't really see them in Lucifer, but maybe in other shows or movies. or does that seem to be like something we're getting away from more than, I mean, I mentioned like we have cognitive dissonance where we have some in real life maybe and some in Hollywood, but are we still seeing them a lot in Hollywood? Because I'm thinking of like everything my dad watched was John Wayne or something like that, right? So you have to have the guy come in and be all tough and he never cries and he's no, you know, he's cool and he can do anything and all the women love him and he rescues everyone and he wanders off in the sunset at the end, right? He's the one with the power and the agency that everyone else just kind of follows around. And of course, he also loved Dirty Harry. So they're a similar kind of character. So you have those, but do we not see those so much? I remember Tom Hardy being asked after that last Mad Max movie when people were like, yeah, but the Furiosa characters, you know, she has her agency. And someone asked him like if that bothered him. And he was just like, no. And then like they moved on to the question. You know, he had like a one-word response. So hopefully we're seeing less of that. But I'm sure.
I think it.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I think it still exists, but it's more in like niche products. Mm-hmm. It's less prevalent in the big tentpole movies and TV shows that everybody's watching. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of like modern, like very modern shows right now, the big hit shows. There's a series on Netflix called Lupin, which is now, I think, Netflix's most watched show, or is almost most watched after the Tiger King documentary. But which I haven't seen, but
seen either.
I think that but that one's interesting because the protagonist, it's very much like a heist kind of series, and so the protagonist is the like action star, but he also does not have a lot of the toxic masculinity traits that we're used to seeing in action stars. He describes himself as a gentleman and has real friendships with women. Doesn't feel like he has to save them, doesn't feel like he can manipulate or bully them, but just interacts with them as other people, which is interesting.
Who knew? Women are people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less the kind of dichotomy between this character and that character, but like characters in the fandoms these days seem to, you always have this rather vocal group that want to like maintain the toxic masculinity. So I was just thinking like with Captain Marvel, you'll always hear people talking about Brie Larson, and especially since in like the last movie she kind of like held up the contract because she wanted to get paid equally with everyone else. And I was seeing all these things about, well, you know, she should just take whatever money she gets. I'm sure she's making millions of dollars. It's like it's not the quantity of money that's the sticking point. I don't think. It sounds like it's that, you know, the male co-stars get X amount and she gets X amount minus some amount, you know. So why shouldn't she get as much as they're getting, right? She was the lead in her movie, right? And then like with there's a female Doctor Who, and so you get a lot of these guys showing up saying we can be a man again. The whole show's been ruined, you know. So we do seem to have those vocal people in the fandoms, and we certainly had the Stad Puppies a few years ago at the Hugo Awards, getting all worked up because, you know, minorities and women were winning the Hugo Awards that year, and the white males didn't. So they're around. Certainly, and they're making themselves known, and they yell a lot, you know, on forums. But I don't know what percentage of, you know, that they really represent. They're just really loud, you know, and they post a lot.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I'm thinking now. I could not bear Grey's Anatomy. Don't send me hate mail, but yeah.
Sorry.
But I know there was something, right, where the one guy was a gay man and felt harassed out of it or something like that, and that was kind of controversial. Yeah, TJ, I can't think of his name. Anyway, but then I think too, like before I cut the cable, I'm watching cable TV now. I kind of live on demand things, but I loved Hawaii Five-O's remake mostly because of the eye candy, just as a gay man, right? But But then I remember I stopped watching it because they would not pay the Asian characters the same amount as they would pay the characters of whiteness, right? So, I mean, I think we're all kind of, for good and for bad, right? We're kind of bringing that, this struggle. And companies are, of course, making their decision based on where the most money is and where, but so I think there has been a troubling of this. And like, I mean, I survived this last year of politics by watching the Great British Bake Off, right? And again, talk about detoxifying masculinity, except still, old Blue Eyes, I can't think of Paul Hollywood, he kind of, they play him into that stereotype, right, of the big bad meanie, no feeling, kind of a thing. But of course, you also have very queer characters and very non-traditional masculine, persons sharing their lives there. So I do think we're in a transition probably stage, but I do think some of this is being driven by pressure from consumers, pressure from culture. And I'm not a both sides are equal person. I don't like false equivalents like that, but I do think they are getting it from both sides, right?
So we have the culture who want everything to go back, and those others who are hoping things move forward.
I think Brian brings up a really good point about companies following the money, because what I was thinking at the beginning of this was, oh, we hear those people all the time, or I hear about those people because they're not in any spaces that I go to. But generally I feel like they're dismissed as, oh, you're always going to have that small minority of people screaming about how a woman can't be a superhero. I don't know if you guys saw the tweet where Brie Larson was holding up Thor's hammer, and it was, she tweeted with the caption something like, "Told you I could lift it," and got all these people just furious about, like, Captain Marvel, that's not really Thor's hammer, that's just a prop, or something like that, as though she didn't know that, and just getting so mad. But I also realize, in saying like, oh, this is just a small minority of stupid people yelling, that's what my small circle of people that I listen to and follow and read and watch say. And so I'm hesitant to say, well, that's the mainstream view now. They've been kind of pushed to the edges, except that early on, and by early on, I mean like around the era of like Gamergate, which at this point is 6, 7, 8 years ago. I forget how long exactly. You would see companies actually cave to that kind of pressure. And these days, my sense is, I don't have specific examples, but my sense is that companies are not as much, because they realize that the quieter faction who's in favor of these more equitable and equal roles and diversity, that faction has now grown larger than the people who scream about it not being right and not being proper. And so the companies will weather the shouts on Twitter and the threats to boycott games, because they know that the popular stand, where their money is in diversity, in equality, in moving forward with representation.
Well, I think even in commercials, right? We see this quickest in commercials, and it seems like one national brand after another is making their same gender, kind of things. Of course, it's still, we're not seeing trans folk represented enough, but yet then, of course, we get into pink washing, right? Like those of us who not only don't want police in our pride parades, but also don't want corporations that, don't live that, right? Like they want the pink dollar, but they don't want to change their policies to make everyone feel welcome or safe or even equal. But I see that, yeah, I think, queer is one example. But Netflix now has every on-demand now has a Black American channel or some kind of, everybody now, YouTube today put Black History Month next to their name, like, it's just, yes, it's good, and then of course you always go to that whole washing thing. That like, well, do their actions really reflect their marketing? But the marketing, I agree with you, undisputably is going toward the right direction.
Yeah, I think Netflix, I think, is the one that for months now has had a Representation Matters collection with non-white, non-male, non-straight protagonist series. So you'll pull up a show and it'll be like Representation Matters collection.
Yeah, I noticed even during Pride they specifically highlighted, the queer thing, and of course, right after that followed George Floyd, and then that. So, but yeah, now they're getting savvier about, and that's kind of good. It's funny because, before I cut the cord, I was a big Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, Chicago Med, Chicago Law. I was loving all those. Even after my time in the streets after Ferguson, but like I just can't watch cop shows anymore, and I don't know how you, like, we're talking about like trying to present like a I'm trying to be political here, a humane police officer. Well, I don't think that could realistically be done because that's just not the way police departments systematically are made to work in our culture. I mean, they'll chase you out or you'll leave because who could be in that toxic situation? So, so I love Netflix doesn't try and push police shows at me anymore because I never watch anything.
There's an interesting point about that. The police sitcom Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which we've always enjoyed because it does celebrate diversity. They have two female Latinx stars in their cast, and the two of them talk behind the scenes about going for the auditions and then finding out that each other were auditioning and then saying to themselves, oh, well, they're not going to hire both of us. They just need one, Latina woman. And when they did ask them both in for the pilot, they were talking about, well, maybe like we should wear our hair differently so we look different so that they'll keep us both. And they're both great. And the show's been committed to diversity and equality, but it is also a police show. And so when the protests happened this summer, the showrunners put out a statement that said, we were preparing a new season. We have scrapped all the things we've written, and we're trying to find a way to write this show that resonates with the modern culture. And so I've always liked the show. I will be really interested to see what they come up with for it. I think if anyone can do it, I think they would be the ones to be able to.
And I do hear a lot of buzz about that show from folks who are concerned with intersectionality and justice. So I have heard that a lot. Yeah.
Okay, final thoughts on toxic masculinity, Brian? Ooh. Yeah.
Talk
about it for weeks, right? But
I think I'll just say sometimes I forget. Moving to Texas was eye-opening for me, right? Because even in St. Louis, I had gotten comfortable in my nice little, progressive socialist bubble. And of course, certainly living in Chicago, where it was unthinkable, I don't know a single person who could have possibly voted for Trump, right? And then St. Louis was a little different. And of course, now here I am in Texas. So I forget, some of us have the privilege to be able to live in the kind of spaces where people will call you in, if not call you out, into a more healthy way of dealing with all these intersectionalities. But I do forget that there are many folks who, fragility and other reasons, they go defensive on it and probably want to run away from it. And that is that exact conversation you're having about about those things. So that's my thought. Is I think there's a critical mass. I think we're never going back, and I think that a lot of the dinosaurs digging in are going to be extinct, but we have to endure their last death gasps, which will be painful and probably deadly and continue to be.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
Brian said that very well. I think for me, the thing about toxic masculinity is to continue to have discussions about it. From my upbringing, there were a lot of things that I didn't realize were part of my thinking until they were pointed out. It was just, this was part of the world. It was not something that anyone ever talked about. It was just there in conversations you had with friends at school, in all the TV shows you watched, in all the movies you watched. And the fact that the media is starting to change, I think, is a really hopeful and important sign. There will always be people yelling about their problems with portrayals in media for one reason or another. But I think the fact that the people who are making the touch points of our culture are buying into these discussions is really important and hopeful, and I hope will continue to give us momentum going forward.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me, both of you. And remember, if you like this episode, hit like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.